Okay. All right, my recording's going. I've got all that switched around. Voice activity. Yay. Okay. So, is everybody looking kind of at my screen now?
Yep.
Okay. So, schedule-wise, we're going through lesson 2.3 today, and we'll go through the code lab there as well. It's worth noting next week there's not an additional lab day for 2.3. Like this is the day we'll cover 2.3. We're going immediately to 3.1 next week. So next week's a little bit of a different structure, and we'll kind of explain it as we get there. But we're going through 3.1, 3.2, 3.3 next week, and part of that is that we're going to do, if I remember right, part of that is that we're not going to go very deeply into those three lessons. So that's one of the reasons that we're kind of doing those quick, and then we'll kind of do a catch-up day on Thursday and Friday for, whatever you need to catch up with. Cool? So that way you can kind of do the labs together in one setting. Because several of these are too short to really dedicate an entire lab day to.
I have a couple questions.
Yep.
So for one, we're doing 2.3 today.
Yep.
Are there no labs for 2.3, or are we doing those like today, like short labs?
Yeah. We'll be doing those. We'll be doing those today. So
Okay.
In terms of what's up there for 2.3, there is obviously the tasks, and I had debated going through. I could do my practical example, or we could do this. As it turns out, my practical example would basically be the code lab. So I'm just going to say let's do the code lab together.
So then will it just be a collective code together for the lab today?
Yeah, so we'll just collectively code together for these tasks, and then I'll let you go off on your own to do the coding challenge, which your coding challenge is going to be to enhance the shopping list that you've already started. And basically all it is to the shopping list you're going to add a text box and a button. You type in a name of a store, or like say, hey, I want to find the closest Deerberg, so I type in Deerbergs and I hit the search button. It'll pull up the Maps app. So that's all you're adding to the shopping list is a little bit to the main activity. Cool.
And then for the console labs, are they due the 1st or the 8th?
The 1st.
The 1st.
I believe that's what it says on Inside Ranken. I believe that's what
Okay.
I'll change it to. Is the 1st of February. Now I can go back and check.
No, I saw the hot test on the 8th, and I didn't know. I couldn't remember.
Yeah. I know I tried to not put those on the same day. Yeah, it's the 1st.
Okay.
So, yeah, and that's obviously coming up quick because that's Monday. So. Is that right? Okay.
Yep, I'm good.
I thought I'd stuck that out further, because we did. Okay. I may have goofed, honestly. I know I stuck it out for the 1st. I may have actually. Well, I need to rethink that one. Call it the 1st. I think I probably should have said the 8th, though, because I'm just kind of looking at. I remember I wanted to get 2 weeks, and I thought I put it 2 weeks out from when I graded it, which I feel like I graded it last week, right? Because you guys, I think I put in grades. I think on the 21st or the 22nd. Does that sound right to everybody?
Yeah, because I don't think they weren't done
Right.
over the weekend.
Okay.
Because I know Monday we still didn't have them, so they were later in that week.
Okay, because I meant it to be 2 weeks from when I had graded those, and so I think I might have goofed, because that would not be 2 weeks. That would be, here we've got a week, and then there's another week in there. So I think I have those on the wrong due date. So let me actually fix that.
I feel like I remember you saying like the 7th.
Yeah, the first is not what I meant to do. So let me fix that here. Okay. Yeah, that's fixed. I moved those off to the 7th because that's what I meant to do. Because it's like, I'm looking at the schedule. It's like, there's no way you're going to have time to finish that by the 1st. There's too many other things in there. So, yeah. Sorry about that. So I moved it up to the 7th. Does that help?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that's a goof on my part. Okay. I'm just not thinking through the whole schedule and all of that kind of thing. So, yeah, so that's the plan. So we'll go through 2.3, and so we'll basically walk through the tasks together as a group, and then you can do the coding challenge, and the coding challenge shouldn't take you more than a few minutes to get done. Okay, so let's hop into the slides for 2.3. So if you would, go ahead and pull these up on perusal. I have added some discussion questions and such to the 2.3 reading assignment as well. So there's some questions and topics out there as far as that goes to kind of get the discussion rolling already. So today what we're going to be talking about is implicit intents. And so you'll remember that on Monday we kind of started talking about them. You heard that term. You heard that term, an implicit intent versus an explicit intent. So what we did with the 2.1 and the 2.2 labs, remember, is we're working completely with explicit intents. And that's the most common kind of intent you will have, is explicit intents. In fact, for most of this course, that is going to be the only kind of intent you have to deal with, is explicit intents. So we will come back to this idea of an implicit intent. We'll come back to it in lesson 9 in several weeks down the road, because it comes back when we start talking about broadcast receivers and services. So that's the other reason that I kind of want to keep the lab time short, is because it's an interesting topic. It's relevant for certain kinds of apps, but it really doesn't tie in with the overall picture of what we're trying to build and learn this semester. Cool?
Yep.
So that's why the short kind of coverage of it. So the first thing we're going to talk about is kind of recap a little bit on what intents are. We'll do a little overview of talking about implicit intents and what they're used for. We'll talk about how to send them, and then we'll also talk about how to receive them. And so that's kind of the topic for today. There are some additional topics in the reading that are not on the slides. There's actually several pages worth. I'd say there's probably five or so pages on the reading assignment that are not on these slides, just so you're aware. So one of those things is how to share things, like build a share button, isn't there, and there's also some stuff related to working with tasks in Android. So do take a look at the reading material, just because there's material that is not on these slides. Okay. So let's talk about intents. So if you remember right, an intent is a description of an operation that you want performed. And they're used to as kind of send messages back and forth between one app component and another, or between with the app between app components or with the Android system. So generally you start from one app component, and that can be a few different things. You start from the app component, initiates the intent, that goes to the Android system, and then Android then delivers it to another component. So from previous lessons, what are the three kinds of app components that exist in Android?
Activity.
Okay, that's one. It's one of three.
Application.
Okay. Application is a class, and it is a kind of context. It's not considered generally an app component.
I'm just guessing, but is an intent one?
Nope. Intent is not an application component.
View.
Nope. View is not an application component. So app component is a very narrow definition. Only includes three things. So activity is one of them. And one of the reasons you might have to kind of write this down is because the other two we haven't talked about yet. And we won't talk about until lesson 9. Okay. So if you have a place to take notes, the three app components are activities, broadcast receivers, and services. Did everybody catch that?
Yeah. ABS.
Yeah. Activities, broadcast receivers, and services. Both broadcast receivers and services are covered in lesson 9. Okay. So we're a ways from talking about those. But the reason that I mention that is because a lot of the stuff that we're dealing with here does apply to those in the future. So keep that in mind. And one of the things that means is the originator can actually be any of those three things, and the receiver can be any of those three things. So, for instance, you can send an intent from an activity to a broadcast receiver, or you can send an intent from a activity to a service. That both of those are viable options. And you also do the reverse. So, for instance, a broadcast receiver can send out an intent that ends up opening an activity, which is extra interesting because, as we'll learn, both broadcast receivers and services are back-end things that do not have a UI. So that means that you can initiate a UI using an intent from something that doesn't have a UI. Okay?
What's the term for these three things again?
App components.
All right.
Terms right here.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a vague term.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like context sounds just as likely to be the thing.
Yeah. But that's context, and a context and app component are not the same thing. So context is kind of, I posted in the Discord kind of a clarification. Context is three things. It's either an application, an activity, or a service. App component, on the other hand, has a lot of overlap there, but it's an activity, a service, or a broadcast receiver. This other one is sometimes Google classifies it under app component content providers. I'm not going to cover them because A, they don't apply to anything we'll do, and B, I'm pretty sure that they're close to the end of their life from things I've kind of seen. So that's where I say there's kind of three, is because the I don't really call the content provider a component in the same way. Okay, so what can intent do? Can intent be used for? And we kind of talked about this here just a minute ago. Intent can be used to either start an activity, start a service, or deliver a broadcast. And you remember, what did I say those three app components were?
Activity, service, broadcast.
Broadcast receiver, right? So that lines up here. Does that make sense? An intent is a communication tool between those different application components. So remember, we've got explicit intents, we've got implicit intents. An explicit intent is when you're saying, I want to open specifically this component. I know what activity I want to go to. I know what service I want to go to. I know what broadcast receiver I want to go to. So I tell it to do that. So if I'm creating an explicit intent, I'll give it a class because I know what class it's going to. If I'm giving it, if I'm trying to create an implicit intent, that means I don't know where this should go, and there may be more than one option. And it especially comes into play when you have things where different users may use a different application to do the same thing. So for instance, on mobile, there's not just one browser, just like there is on any operating system, right? On Android, I might have a Chrome browser, I might have the Opera browser, I might have Firefox, I might have the Samsung browser. There's a lot of different options. So for instance, if I want to say open a link, right, I don't want to tell the operating system to open it in Chrome. Does that make sense? I don't want to tell the operating system that it should open in Chrome. I want to tell it, here's a link, open it in whatever browser you choose. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's why this idea exists. The idea of an implicit intent is to have different apps that can provide ways of doing the same thing, but so you have options, right? So you have options, and you can decide what is your preferred tool in that mix. And so generally, when you're talking about an explicit intent, you're only traveling within your own application. And an implicit intent generally means that you are communicating between your application and another application, or between you and the operating system. So that's the other reason why we're going to focus primarily on explicit intents, is because most of our applications will only be talking to themselves. Does that make sense?
Okay, so it's always an implicit intent if we're talking about something like a browser. Even if it's chosen that we're going to use, say, Chrome as the default, it's still implicit.
It would be explicit if you would say start Chrome browser activity or something like that, right? If you were to provide the class name for the Chrome browser activity, then it would be an explicit intent.
Oh, okay, so it's hard coded. It's not something the user would choose, like always open these links in Chrome, for example.
Yeah. If you just say this is a link, the difference is you just say this is a link, open it in whatever can open links, open URLs, rather than saying open like second activity.class.
Okay, so it's generally considered poor UX to designate a specific browser. I don't think I've ever seen that.
Yeah, it's very poor UX, and it's basically never done, because it's not actually stable if you do it that way anyway. So implicit intents. So we're kind of talking about that and kind of talking about what they are. So they can be used to start an activity in another application. That's kind of, the common thing that we do with it. So you might, for instance, maybe share an article. Maybe you want to share an article to Facebook, or you want to share an article to Twitter or Reddit or wherever you want to do it. Viewing a map. So you want to open up your Maps app. That would be an implicit intent because you're going to another application. Or you say take picture. Well, then you're bringing up the camera app. So again, another app. And it may be providing, so it might be, what are they trying to do? Say there, specify an action, optionally provide data. Oh, yeah. So when we say we want to do that action, when we want to create that implicit intent, basically we provide it two pieces of data. We provided what we call an action, which is always a string. The action is always a string, and generally it's going to be a constant because you want to make sure that all the apps are using the same constant, the same string. So we'll use a string as the action, and then you often have a data, which is your URI, that then goes with that to say what do you actually want to open. And it's worth saying that that data, that URI is optional. You don't necessarily have to provide one. That depends on action to action basis. So for instance, if I want to say action view, which is what I used to open something in a browser, I do have to provide a URL for it to open. Does that make sense? I can't just say open a page in a browser but not tell it what page to open. So in cases like that, then I do have to provide data. But on the other hand, if I want to say, well, take a picture, there's no data I have to provide for taking a picture. I just say, take a picture and tell me when it's done. Does that make sense? So some of those will include a data that's a URI. Some of those will not. Now, just because you don't need to pass a URI doesn't mean that you don't need to pass some sort of data. So there's a lot of cases where you might pass an implicit intent where you don't pass data, but you do pass extras. And so those extras can be really anything, as you've seen. They can be really any data type. So I can pass integers around as extras. I can pass booleans around as extras. I can pass doubles and strings around as extras. So that's, extras are really general. Things I can't pass around as data are things that can't be written as URIs or URLs. So like telephone numbers, there's a standard for telephone numbers. Map coordinates, there's the geo standard. Protocol, HTTP, HTTPS, there's a standard there. But say I just want to pass in a number, say 1, 2, 3. How do I turn that into a URI? How would you take a number and turn it into a URI?
Is that extra string thing?
Well, no, that would be an extra. So let's say I've got the number 1, 2, 3. Remember, a URI has to have a protocol. What protocol can I use if I want to send a number as the data?
Perhaps a tell.
Okay, but if I pass it as tell, what does that mean? That has a meaning to it.
Yeah, it would probably just use the default phone app. That would probably be explicit then, right?
Tell says that this number is a phone number, right? What if this is somebody's age? What protocol do I use if I'm passing somebody's age? So the answer is there isn't, right? There's a lot of pieces of data that cannot be passed as URIs. Everybody get that?
Yeah.
Okay. There's a lot of data that cannot be passed as URIs. Everything can be sent as extras. Not everything can be sent as data. Okay? Everything, there's some way to send it as an extra. There's not, the same does not apply to data or a URI. Okay. So once we initiate that implicit intent, and right now basically the way that we're going to do that is we're going to use start activity, just like we did previously. We use start activity to start our own activities. You can use start activity with implicit intents to start activities in another application. So we'll create this implicit intent, pass it the start activity. At that point, the Android operating system will go look through all of the applications that are installed and determine which of those are able to handle your implicit intent. And so let's say it finds 3 different applications that can handle it. it will then bring up an app chooser to say, well, choose one of these applications to use to open it. It will also give you the option of saying, I want to make this the default for all future requests. So, next time you get a link to open up in a web browser, just always use this browser and don't prompt me again. If you only have one app installed that can do that, say you only have one web browser, it will automatically just use that web browser. It will skip the app chooser. Does that make sense? So the next question is, so we've covered if there's multiple answers, you'll get a chooser with the option of making it a default. If there's only one, it just automatically uses it. What happens if there's no options? What happens if your Android device doesn't have a web browser installed? What do you think it's going to do?
Would it not be able to open it? Just
Okay. Just what?
Probably throw some error.
Probably throw some error. Okay. What usually happens when an exception is thrown?
It stops the application from running and an error message.
Mm-hmm. So it can actually crash your application. If you try to tell it, here's an implicit intent, it can't find anything that can handle that, that will crash your application. Everybody with me there?
Yeah.
Like, it will crash. I think it may just crash the activity and go back to the previous activity, but it will definitely crash your application. So that's a big thing to keep in mind, right? And you do have to guard against that, and especially because you have no control over that, right? So if you're saying, let's use this implicit intent, you don't have any control over what other applications your user has installed. They might literally just have your application installed and nothing else, right? And in that case, all implicit intents will fail. Does that make sense?
Is this not something you can solve with a try-catch?
You could solve it with a try-catch, but there's a different recommended way. It's later on the slides that I'll show you. There's an if statement that you usually want to wrap them in to check before you say start activity. Okay.
Okay.
So, yes, you could catch it with a try-catch, but usually we want to use an if statement instead. That's considered better practice. But either one is a way to solve the problem. It's just a better experience and easier to solve, easier to track down bugs if you use the if statement instead. Okay, so how does that kind of keep track of, how does it know what application to run? Well, first of all, the Android runtime keeps a track of all of the apps that are installed. It knows it has a list of every app that's installed. And every app, when it gets installed, has to provide a manifest file. Remember, you have that manifest file that gets created when you have a new application. So when you install something from the Play Store, it pulls down that manifest file and looks at it, okay? And it saves that. So in that manifest file, it says that everything that's in there, all the app components, and remember, the app components that it has to register are all of your activities, all of your broadcast receivers, all your services. So all of those are going to be registered in your manifest, right? So it keeps track of what all those are and what implicit intents will trigger them, okay? So it's got a list of that running. And so when the runtime receives your intent, your request, it will go through that giant list of installed applications and all the manifests that are there and say, okay, let's find the ones that satisfy this, and it'll come back with that list. And part of the way that it does that, looking through the manifest, is it uses something called an intent filter. So an intent filter tells tells Android what intents are you interested in hearing about. And so basically, if you declare that you want that intent, you're going to get that intent. So, there's also some security concerns about that because, well, other applications can potentially see that intent. So, security comes in as soon as you're talking about implicit intents. If there's more than one match, as I kind of mentioned previously, you let the user choose one. And then finally, once the user's chosen one, it will then start the requested activity, providing it the data that you gave, as well as any extras that you've provided with the intent as well. So the app chooser that appears often looks something like this. This is actually a pretty old app chooser. This is going back to KitKat. Newer devices have a slightly different look to them, but they have the same functionality. Okay, so your app chooser looks very different based on what version of Android you have installed. But the whole point is just to be able to choose one, and then some way to be able to choose if you want that to be the default one for future. Questions so far on implicit intents?
Nope.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about how we send an implicit intent. And remember, we've got two kind of things remaining. We'll talk about sending, we'll talk about receiving, and then we'll go jump into the code lab. So sending, if we want to create a new intent and say I want to call, then I might create it like this. I create an intent variable. Obviously, the variable can be named anything, but usually we name it intent. You're going to say new intent and then provide it a string of some sort, which is the action. So you can actually create your own actions sometimes, as far as, maybe you have an action that you want to, be able to, maybe it's an action for Facebook or it's an action for Twitter or something that's not built into the Android operating system. So you can potentially provide your own string there. But typically what you're going to use is a constant from the intent class. So you can see on the intent, it's intent.action call button. And you can see that all uppercase, which kind of tells you that it's a constant. So if you look at the class intent in the Android docs, you'll see that there are a ton of constants on that intent class. There's a ton of constants for action. There's a ton of constants for other things, including extras that you'll see in there for all of the different common implicit intents that exist, which is a pretty large list.
Hey, Mr. Smith, on this right here, the action call button, that constant. Okay, what is the best practice for naming those? Because I don't really see like what that has to do with anything, including a message. I mean, whatever it is, it could just be gibberish or just you just kind of pass it. I don't recall it coming into play where I look at it and I'm like, oh, this is what this does. It's just kind of there, like along for the ride. It doesn't seem to provide value. So the name of it.
You mean the constant?
The constant. So it's called what it would be like something like public string final, and then the name. It'd be action call button, and then there's the message. I don't. What my question is what to call those, because to me it doesn't really seem to have any meaning. It's just kind of along for the ride.
The convention is you always start the name with the kind of thing it is, right? So if it's an extra, it starts with extra underscore. If you're using it as an extra, it's extra underscore. If you're using it as action, it's action underscore. If it's being used as a category, it's category underscore, and then the thing it is. So the prefix matters a lot, and that's kind of how we help distinguish with what kind of constant it is. Okay.
Right, and then what would the actual string be?
So the actual string. So if I pull up the Android API docs, we can kind of see what that is. So part of the convention, and you saw this with the the extras, right? They kind of put the application name into that extra. Does that make sense? You remember that? So we like started with the package name dot extra and then dot message or something of that sort, right?
Yeah.
And in that case, I said that's not really a big deal for the extras. It's really fine if you just say message with the extra as far as the extras are concerned.
You mean the actual string?
Yeah, the actual string. It's okay if it just says message. That's okay. Just shorten it that way. That's not true for the actions. So if you're going to define your own custom actions, you do want to put the application name in there because that's a case where you're communicating between different applications. So it is important to clarify what application kind of defined it. So if I was working at Facebook and I wanted to define an action, I would say com.facebook would be the start of the name of the action. So if I go into, I'm here in the intent class and looking at that documentation, even just up at the top, you can see there's a link to the action view constant. Does everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to follow that. And in here, it actually tells me the value of that constant. So that constant action view corresponds to the string android.intent.action.view.
It's literally that. It's like almost that you could put anything there. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
A constant value. Okay, but that's just. Is that built into the editor, the Android Studio, or do you have to remember that and type it out?
This is built in. So you'll just type in intent.actionView, and that will give you this string, right? You'll be referencing that constant. One of the catches is, say, for these values, if I define these values in the manifest, if I'm defining things in XML, I don't have access to these constants. So for instance, in the XML, I do actually have to write this string out. I do have to actually write it as android.intent.action.view in the XML, but I'm in the Java code, I would refer to it using this constant and not use that literal value. Does that follow?
Yeah, once we do some of these, I think it'll sink in.
That matters very much when you're receiving intents. So when you're sending intents, you're generally in the Java world, so you would use this. If I'm receiving an intent, I'm in the XML world is where it starts, so I have to use the actual value, as it turns out. Okay. So let's go back here. So basically the two steps normally, you create an intent, you give it an action. You'll notice when I create this here, I don't give it a context and I don't give it a class, which is what we did with the explicits. It's just this string. Okay. And then once I've done that, then I can say start activity with it. I can just say start activity and pass that intent here. Now, the thing that they've got wrapped around here, this is the check that keeps your program from crashing. This is the check that keeps your program from crashing. So it's something that you kind of write down, commit to memory, because you just kind of have to know to do it anytime you have an implicit intent. You don't have to do this for explicit intents because they're referring to something in your application, so you know it's there. But you do need to use this for any implicit intents. So the word here, we say intent.resolve activity. So what that's going to do is it's going to go take the intent that you have, that you've created, you've built, and try to see if it can find an activity to use. That will respond to, they'll be able to deal with that request. So it'll give you some results if it does find it. One of the arguments that you're giving it here is get package manager. Does everybody see that?
Yeah.
So the package manager is what keeps track of the applications that you have installed. If you need to do anything with seeing whether or not an application is installed on their device, that's what you use there is the package manager. So the package manager can actually give you a full list of everything that's installed. And what version it is and all those kind of things. So we give it that package manager so that it can look through the installed application. That's why that's there. Okay. And so if it finds one that returns something that's not null, it returns basically the results of that search. And you can get more in depth to that because sometimes you may be interested in what the options are that come back. For instance, some applications do provide their own choosers. So you can actually use the result of that to build your own application chooser. But generally all we do is we just carry, is there something or is there not something? And so if there's nothing, if it comes back null, then that means there's no options. If it comes back non-null, there means that there's at least one option. So then you just say start activity because you know there's at least one option. Cool? This check, honestly, is really hard to find if you're just looking through the docs. That line of code is really hard to figure out from the documentation.
Gee, what a surprise. I would never thought of that. It's always so clear and to the point.
Yeah. So, I love the documentation, but that... I wish it was more concise. I wish that check was more concise than it is. I understand what it is and kind of why it is that way, but I wish there was a more concise way to write that. So let's say we want to have one that has a URI with it additionally. So here, let's say I'm going to create an intent, and this is going to try and dial a phone number. So it's going to open up your phone app and dial a phone number. And you might do that if maybe you want to say, give a call me link to your business. Let's say, hey, you're placing some sort of online order or trying to get in touch with the plumber. You might want to have a button like this. So we create an intent with the action of dial. So dial says put the number into the dialer, but don't actually hit call. So we create that, and then we also add in data. So we do intent.setData, kind of like we did set extra or put extra. Here we're going to say URI. We're going to take this string, parse it as a URI because setData only takes a URI. It does not take a string. There's no version of setData that takes a string. So you have to parse the URI first and then hand it off. Now, it's worth noting that URI.parse can throw an exception because, as I kind of mentioned previously, not all strings are valid URIs. So URI.parse could throw an exception if you gave it something that isn't a valid URI. Okay? In this case, they're not putting a try-catch around this because they know this is valid, right? But if we were taking that number from, say, user input, say you're like writing Yelp or something like that, where the phone numbers are being provided for your users, you would probably need to try the parsing and catch that exception because you can't guarantee that user data is going to be valid. Okay? So we create that, and then same as previously, we would put in the check to see if we can resolve the activity or not before we call start activity. And generally speaking, in the case of else where there's nothing available, usually the best thing you can do is just show a toast. Usually in the else case, we just say, well, let's show a toast saying that I can't find an application to do that. Does that make sense? So like if you're trying to open up a web page, you might say, let's show a toast saying that you don't have a web browser installed. Cool. So that's how we usually just deal with the other case, is we just show a toast. Create a URI. So providing the data, there's a lot of different kinds of data obviously you can provide. So we might provide a telephone number that would start with TL : we might provide a map location, so geographic. That's what that's short for. And so usually it's going to be a latitude and a longitude here separated by commas. But as you see in this example, so they've provided 0, 0 as the lat and long. But notice after that they've got this question mark and Q equals blah, 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 blah. Well, what does this part look like? Do you remember seeing something like that last semester?
A query string.
Looks like a query string, right? So like that question mark starts the query string, and so they're saying Q is equal to blah. So that's short for query, or basically what they're doing is they're doing a search. So if you put this in here, and pull it up and tell it to open up in Google Maps, what Google Maps will then do is it'll look for the Brooklyn Bridge in Brooklyn, New York, instead of using the GPS coordinates. Does that make sense? So you can actually look up things by name this way, not just by GPS coordinates. So I could look up, say, St. Louis using this pattern. Okay? And then we also have a URL. So here this would be android.com. Okay? So show a web page. That would be the 3-step process to show google.com. Again, start activity is usually bounded by that if statement. Dial a phone number would be like that. It's worth noting that there are 2 different actions which are very similar. So action dial takes the number and just dials it in. Action call will actually take the number, dial it in, and start the call. Does that make sense? So dial just dials the number. Call will actually initiate the call. So you can do that. The difference being action dial, basically any app can do. Action call, you actually have to give permission to that app to be able to call somebody. Okay?
So it would prompt the user.
You actually have to prompt the user earlier on. So the way that you get that permission is you actually have to request it in the manifest file. And we'll talk about that later. But it's worth noting that some of these implicit intents do require additional permissions. Okay? Some of them do require additional permissions, at which point you basically have to ask for them in the manifest. Which means that the user gets prompted for that phone permission when they download it from the Play Store, not at the point when they try to make the call. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So that's where you'll oftentimes see those prompts when you pull things down from the Play Store, is because it's asking permissions right up front there. So recently they have added some ways to ask for it later rather than asking for it up front. But a lot of apps still use ask for it up front. Daniel, you had something to say?
I was pretty much going to say that.
Yeah.
They are phasing that out and going for
Yeah.
asking for permission when it's needed.
Yeah. Which is a little bit more complicated because it means adding a lot more code, because what it means is anytime you want to go do that thing, you have to actually write code to go request the permission and then deal with, if you get rejected or denied. So unfortunately that means quite a bit more code from a developer standpoint. But I can also agree that it's a better thing from a privacy and a security standpoint. Okay. But I think there's a later lesson that talks about permissions. So we can look at that at some point there. So we're going to create here we got kind of a web search, for instance. Here we're going to open up, say, Google and go look for something. We're going to say action web search. And I say Google, but it definitely doesn't have to be Google. It could be anything that can provide a web search. So it might go. This might go into Firefox. It might go in Opera. It might go into somewhere else. But it's going to go into whatever provides that functionality. So you create with that action. Here we've got kind of a query. So we're pulling it from an edit text. So whatever the user typed in, we'll take that as the query. And here we're adding it actually as an extra. So you'll notice we're saying intent.putExtra search manager.query. Now this is interesting. Search manager.query. Notice that that's not on the intent class. Everybody see that? So it's a constant, but it's not on the intent class. So most of the constants, a lot of these constants you will find on intent, not all of them. Okay, so there are other places that these exist. And so if you're looking at the perusal reading on that note, one of the questions that I've asked is where do you find the actions and extras related to network connectivity, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth? Because those three are not actually on the intent class, and they're actually pretty commonly used ones. Okay? That might require some Google searching to figure that one out. But it's worth kind of understanding where some of those things are located. Okay? So we add an extra, and then we start it. So you can kind of see there's a pattern. You create the intent, you add in whatever data or extras you need, and then you send the intent. Okay? Other things you may want to add in addition to extras or data, sometimes you need you want to specify a category, so that will narrow down what kind of apps listen for that intent. So openable would be things for if you've got a URI that represents a file, then that would be just apps that can deal with files. Category browsable would be something that a web browser would open, like a URL. So like hepgoogle.com, that would be something that's browsable. It would not be something that is openable. Does that follow? So there's a bunch of different categories that you can specify. So let's say we want to send here we're going to send an intent to create a file. So here the action is action create document. So it's going to create a file. We're going to set the type of that to application PDF. So we're saying I want to create a PDF, and then I'm giving it a category of intent, category openable, because I want that to be whatever receives that, I want it to actually make a file. So I only want to consider applications that can work with files. I don't care about the web browser in that case. Cool?
But that string you're passing along with it,
yeah.
There's that set text that's built in, right? It was like something dot something dot something above. That is absolutely necessary, or it will not work, right?
Where are we looking at the action, the MIME type, or the category?
I'm not talking about the type.
Okay.
I mean, I'm scrolling above in the slides to find what I'm talking about, but it's related to the thing I was talking about before.
This?
Yes.
That was not on the slides. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was talking about. That right there, what's highlighted in blue, that is passed, and that is what makes it work or not work.
Yeah, so that's the kind of string that's actually passed here. This constant is just basically a shorthand for that.
Okay, all right.
So
I'm tracking now.
Intent.action create category. This is a constant. It is a string, but it's defined in the Android operating system. Same with intent category openable. That's also a string.
Okay, so the extra underscore message that was all caps, that doesn't really change the functionality, but it's a good
Right.
habit to continue
Yes.
to do these things. Okay.
Yes.
All right, I got it. Thank
yes. It's just a good habit so you don't have what we call magic strings or magic values littered throughout your code. So that way, if one of those things need to change, like the string needs to change, the integer needs to change, you can just go to the top of the file and change it rather than having to hunt down the 20 different places in your application where you're using it. So that's just using constants is a good habit. Okay, so in this case, we're creating a file. We want to then have results from that. So here I would actually say, rather than start activity, I would say start activity for result. So with some of these implicit intents, you can use start activity for result because you're going to get some data back, and you would then handle that the same way we did previously, same way we did with the last lesson in on activity result. So implicit intents, you can send with start activity for result, receive the value, receive the result in on activity result. And it basically functions the same way as what we saw using somebody else's activity instead of our own. Okay? So there's two ways to start the implicit intent, either start activity or start activity for result, depending on what kind of intent it is. So common actions that you might see as far as implicit intents go, you might have action set alarm. So say you want to go out there and have the user set an alarm for a meeting that's coming up, or some sort of event that you want them to be reminded of. You can use set alarm for that. So that will open up their alarm, usually their clock application, maybe Google Calendar, so they can get a reminder of it. Image capture will let you open up the camera app so that they can take a picture. Create document lets you create a new file on their computer. Action send to, let's actually pull this one up. We can kind of look at the documentation there. So it says send a message to someone specified by the data. So that can be a lot of things. So for instance, it might be a mail to link. Maybe it's something you want to send an email out. Send to can also be used for things like instant messaging or text messaging. So you might use a send to action to say, let's start a text message. So that's what that's kind of there for. Apps that handle common actions. Common actions are usually handled by some of the apps that you have installed. They might be system apps, like they come with the phone, or they might be user downloaded apps that can handle that. So your alarm clock, your calendar, your camera, your contacts, your email, your file storage, your maps, your music, your video, notes, phone, all of these are kind of common things that you might want to integrate into your application using implicit intents. Okay? So implicit intents give you a way to send data to their other applications, as well as potentially get data back. Okay? So let's talk briefly about receiving an implicit intent. I will make one note on this. This idea of receiving is something we're going to talk about here, and then, to be perfectly honest, we'll forget about until lesson 9, as far as receiving implicit intents. So just be, fair forewarned. Some of the stuff here in lesson 2 and 3 and such is really foreshadowing and giving you some foundation, but won't necessarily be something we flesh out until the end of the course. Okay? So we're going to talk about here receiving an intent, but this part for sure, receiving an implicit intent, will not be on your hands-on test. I can tell you that offhand. There won't be anything about receiving an implicit intent on your hands-on test. May or may not be one about sending, but there definitely won't be anything about receiving. So in order to receive that implicit intent, we have to say one of our activities can receive that intent using an intent filter. We'll define that in the Android manifest. So that filter announces that the activity is interested in that implicit intent and it knows what to do with it. And so that filter also puts conditions on what intents you can get. One of the things you don't want to do is say that this activity can get any intent, because that means that actually has a big performance impact on your phone. Because remember, every time it goes and sends an implicit intent, it has to look at all the applications that can receive it. So if you declare, every time you declare that you can receive an implicit intent, you do have to be concerned with the overall health of the device, because you're actually already slowing the device down, even if the user never uses your application. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So if you declare that you're going to receive an intent, you're declaring that you're going to receive it until and be available for it until they uninstall that application. So keep that in mind. And so you want your filters to usually be pretty narrow. So in this case, we've got our share activity that we've defined, and we've defined it with this intent filter tag that's wrapped around here. So inside of activity, we've got an intent filter. Inside of that intent filter, we put what the conditions are for what intents we will handle. So here we're saying I'm going to handle ones with an action of send, a category of default, and a MIME type of text plane. If the intent doesn't satisfy all three of those, then we're not going to get it. We're not interested in it. Does that make sense? So all the three of these are combined in an and, if that makes sense. It's also, so things you might put in there, for instance, Android intent action view, that would match action view or send, if you want to listen for those kind of things. Your category, typically it's just going to be default, Android category, intent category default, but there are some other options there, Android intent category browser, and you can click this link. They'll take you to a list of categories, and if you kind of pay attention to the top, the place that this actually takes you to is the intent class itself. So you can basically find out about most of the categories that are available just by looking at the intent class in the documentation. So if you go far enough down, okay, standard categories, here's a list of standard, quote-unquote, commonly used categories. And you'll see there's a good long list. Okay. Does everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you notice that there's at least one on there for cars?
Yeah.
So there's like a car dock and a car mode. So remember, because there are some cars that actually are running Android, that have an Android system on their dashboard. So those are kind of related to that.
Isn't that like Android CarPlay?
It's Android Auto, I believe, is the name. I believe Android Auto is the name. So categories, you can specify a few different constraints on the data. So for instance, you can say Android scheme, and you can sell it, oh, I'm only interested in these protocols. So if I put this in here, I would be only receiving intents with a URI that starts with HTTPS. Or I could say, well, I only want ones that start with GET. So let's say we'll make the scheme GET. Or I want ones that are files. So we'll say it starts with file. So that you can kind of specify that. You can also specify a host. So you can say, I only want ones that are going to this host. Here they're saying developer.android.com. If I were to say, be building an app for Ranken, I might say Ranken edu. Or in the case of Facebook, well, Facebook is listening for ones that are facebook.com, or Twitter is listening for twitter.com, and they don't care about any other intents. And so this is part of how Twitter and Facebook hook in, and when you click a link on the internet or in any other application, it gives you the option to open it up in the Twitter application or the Facebook application, or YouTube can handle YouTube links, and you open up the YouTube app, is because they've specified this host. Got it? So in Android MIME type, and you can specify what kind of files you might be interested in. So the scheme and the host we generally use for like URLs, or you could do the scheme as tell, and that would specify I just want phone numbers. And then we have the MIME type is usually related to files. Okay. An action, an activity can actually have more than one intent filter. So in this case, we have one intent filter that specifies, hey, we want send and some other conditions, the action to be send and some other conditions, or it can be send multiple and some other conditions. So you can kind of OR together different sets of conditions using multiple intent filters. Okay. This again comes up more when we're dealing with things in lesson 9, where this is more relevant. But that can be an interesting thing when you need to handle more than one intent with the same activity. The other way that you could write something like this is you could say, kind of merge it into one. So here we're saying that the action can be either send or send multiple. The category must be default, but the data, the MIME type, can either be image or video. So if I was going to write this separately, I would have had to write this as 4 different intent filters, right? Because there's 4 different combinations that satisfy this. But oftentimes you can combine them this way. If you're kind of a little bit lenient on the MIME type, or you're lenient on the action. Okay. So there's a lot more to learn on this. You know, the biggest place to learn is to just go to the intent class and read all of the documentation that's there. You can see that there is an awful lot of text just at the top of this class, right? So anything you want to know about explicit intents, implicit intents, like intent, the intent class is your go-to. That's the official source of all this documentation. Okay. All right, so let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into Android Studio, and we'll start hashing through the code lab and do a practical example with this. Okay. So maybe call it 20 minutes, and we'll come back at 2:05.
Okay.
You said 205? Yeah, it's 205. Never.
minutes. Okay, I'm back. Everybody get a chance to stretch your legs?
Yep.
Okay. Awesome. So let's get right into it. So what we're going to be building is the application that's shown right here. So you can see that it's got 3 text fields and it's got 3 buttons. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have each of these buttons, we're going to send a different kind of implicit intent, and that will kind of let us play around with some of these. And for each of these, we'll kind of take the data that's in the field above it and pass that in along with the implicit intent.
Do you want us to code along? Is this still going to be like, are we doing this as homework still, as a grade?
Yep, you're still turning this in for a grade. Yeah, so you're still turning this in. You'll still be turning this in for a grade. So I'm going to pull up Android Studio. And so if you look at task 1, right, what does it tell you to name the project?
Implicit intents.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to create a brand new project. And so let's go to empty activity. I'm going to type in implicit intents. Please do keep the same casing. I've got a space in there. This is lesson 2.3, so I'm going to put it under 2.3/implicit intents. And then we'll hit create on that.
Mr. Smith,
Mm-hmm.
if I just accidentally spelled it wrong and then hit finish without catching it, is there a way I can change the name of it? Intense, I actually accidentally added an extra E.
So you would have to close Android Studio and go change the name of the folder.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you misname the project, you have to go change it on the folders. You've got to go rename the folders. You can't do that through Android Studio itself.
Okay, it's done. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. What you can do in Android Studio, if you go into values, strings, XML, you can change the application name here under strings XML. You can change that, and that's one of the things you'll want to do, but you'll still need to go change the name of the actual folder. So. All right. So given what our goal is, so I'm going to pull up main and we're going to start building that out. So what we want to do is go to main and we're going to build exactly as it shows here. Any questions, difficulties before I get going on that? Any trouble creating the project? Okay, So I'm going to turn on System UI so I can see that. And then I'm going to go drag in the edit fields. And so remember the edit fields, I'm going to go over to text. I'm going to drag in plain text. So 1 and 2 and 3. And I'll drag the buttons in here. 1, 2, and 3. Put that side by side so I can see what I'm doing. Okay. So if I kind of think about, where the constraints should be, starting from the top down, from the top to the bottom, just kind of reviewing with people how to set up the constraints in this constraint layout. That top field, where should the constraints be, and how many of them should I have? Which side?
You should connect to the top, and then both the left and right side.
Okay.
And then set the width to match constraint.
Yep. So I would set the width to match constraint, but I'm going to leave the height alone. Do I need to do anything else there to get it to look the same way?
You could add some margins on the side.
Okay. So somebody else, how much margin did I say to usually add?
I was 8.
Okay. It's 8 or 16. Either one is fine. Some devices are better. Some devices really need 16 pixels. Some devices, 16 dp of spacing is good. Other devices, it's 8. So I kind of go back and forth between the two, depending on what I'm building. And sometimes that's something I have to change from. Maybe tablets is one number and maybe the phone is a different number. So that's again something that's sometimes a variable. Okay, so that's where I would put the field. What about the first button? What does it need to be anchored to?
To the bottom of that top plain text.
Okay. Anywhere else?
The left and right side.
The left and right sides?
Yeah.
Okay. So if I anchor it to the left and the right, does it look like the picture?
Oh no, sorry. You just want it on the left side and add margin.
Okay. Right. Because if you look at the picture, it's just anchored over to the left side of the screen. Okay. So we can kind of follow that same process going down. And so each of the text fields will have 3 constraints, and the buttons will just have 2.
Are we going to build out a landscape view too?
I don't think we'll need to. We can look here in a second. We can get this situated, and I'll turn it landscape, and we can see what it looks like there. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this landscape. And so from what I see there, at least on the pixel, it looks fine. Let me go down to generic 4-inch. So I see on the landscape version of it, it looks like it's running off the screen. Okay, does everybody see that? On the landscape version?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me give a few minutes for everybody to get to this point. But realistically, we have 2 options for how to fix this. One option is to make the whole thing scroll, and another option would be to maybe give it a different layout variant. Honestly, I'm kind of looking at this screen, and I don't know how I would rearrange it to make it work for landscape. Does that make sense? I don't see a way that rearranging it would help.
Mr. Smith, mine's not running off the screen
You're-
on the Nexus S.
You need to be the Nexus S. And you
Yeah.
also need to make sure you have the system UI on. Because if I have, you see, if I don't have the system UI, it looks like I have more space than I actually do.
Yeah, I got
Yeah.
it.
So, I mean, if I was running in full screen, then the last button is only just barely running off the screen. And you can kind of see on mine, it's not all the way on. But if I turn the system UI, which is going to be on, you can see that whole third field just disappears. And so that's why I say oftentimes you want to make sure you turn on the system UI so you're actually testing with what it's going to look like. Does that make sense? Because this is one of those cases where it looks like it would fit, but it doesn't actually. Okay, I'm going to go back to portrait. And so other thing I want to do before we go too much further, I want to rename all these fields to reflect what they're going to be. So I'm going to put this in as URL edit. Yep. I am going to change this one to location edit refactor, and I will change this one to share edit dot refactor, and so this is going to be same kind of way. So I have my URL button, my location button, and my share button. Okay, so thumbs up that post when you get here.
What order are those in? It seems like it's out of order from the way you typed them. It's I don't. Never mind.
Okay.
Good.
They're top to bottom. Okay. So a few things I still need to do. I haven't changed the text on any of those. So I still need to do that here. And I still want to kind of set it up in a way that it can work on landscape. So what I'm going to do for making it work on landscape, I'm going to take the approach of getting it to scroll. Now, the catch with getting it to scroll is that constraint layout doesn't really like to be inside of a scroll view. Is everybody following with me? Constraint layout doesn't really like to be inside of a scroll view. So I need to move things around so that in the designer it works better. So what I'm going to do, going back to my layout, what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to create two separate layouts. Okay. So I'm going to copy the layout that I have right now and paste it, but I'm going to call it content main. So I've got activity main and I've got content main, and right now they both have the same thing in them. Okay.
Sorry. So you just pasted in the layout?
Yep, I just copied and pasted. So I copied activity main, I clicked on here, and I did a paste there, and it asked me to rename it. So Control C, Control V.
It's not working for me. You right clicked on activity
Nope.
main.
I didn't right click anywhere. I selected that. I hit Control C at the same time to copy it. And then I went up to layout and did a Control V here.
Okay, yeah, it doesn't work with the mouse. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't do with the mouse.
I was able to do it with the mouse, but
I'm sure there's a way to do it with the mouse, but no, I didn't do it with the mouse.
there's just a lot of copying options that you have to.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ones that you have to kind of keep straight, and so sometimes it's just easier to do it with the keyboard. Okay, so that makes sense. So far, I have two copies of the same layout with a different name. Because what I'm going to do, basically, I'm going to take content main and put it inside of activity main. So activity main will be on the outside, and content main will be inside of it. Okay, so that way I can have my content main will have a constraint layout at the root. But my activity main will actually have a scroll view at the root. And that way that I can keep the designer happy. So open up activity main. Make sure you're on activity main. And we're going to go to the code view of activity main. Now I'm going to push that namespace down so I can kind of see it. So again, this is on activity main. Make sure you're on activity main and not content main. I'm going to remove all of the stuff that is inside of this layout, like so. And again, I'm using the code view to do this.
Did you delete it or just cut it?
I just backspaced. I
Gotcha.
deleted it
Hey,
all.
wouldn't it be wise to name all the buttons and all that first, so we don't need to do it again?
I did.
You did?
I did.
Oh, I didn't see it. Okay.
Yeah. When we get back into it, you'll see it. But I did already name them. So everybody here. So I removed everything that was in there. So I only have the starting tag for constraint layout, and I have the ending tag for constraint layout. Make sure you keep everything here that's still on that constraint layout tag. You need all those properties still. Okay. Everybody got that? You're in the same place?
Yep.
So what I'm going to now do, I'm going to change this. Right now, this part tells it that's a constraint layout. I'm just going to change this to scroll view. Just like that. So I changed the beginning, the end. It automatically changed the end, actually, to scroll view.
Can you redo that, Mr. Smith?
Yeah. So it was like this. I just selected all of that, typed in scroll view, hit enter on there. And, well, okay, this time it didn't change it.
Mine doesn't look... Okay.
But you can do it manually. So the point is I've changed this from one type of thing to another type of thing. Okay. And if I were to look at this in the designer, you would just see that it's empty, right? There's nothing in there, but we've got a scroll view at the top is what we were trying to get to. So now inside of there, what I'm going to use is I'm going to use a special tag called include. Include allows you to include another file, in this case another layout, inside of this layout file. So in here, I'm going to say I want to include the content main. And I think that should be Android layout. Yeah. So I'm going to include a layout there. And then I also want to specify some dimensions to it. So I'm going to specify the Android, the layout width, and the layout height. So the layout width is going to be match parent because I want it to take up the full width. And the height, it should be wrap content. So that would say to include the entire content main layout inside of here with a width of match parent and a height of wrap content. And those values are the ones you have to use. And so if I look back on the designer, you should see it behaving like this, right? So now if I go back to designer, because I'm including that other layout, I can see all the stuff here. And in fact, if I turn it to landscape now, I should have the ability to drag it up and down. Although I think I may actually have to just try that on the emulator.
When I try to put in match parent, the text turns red.
Yeah, it's complaining that you haven't put in a height yet. Because you always have to put a height and a width together. You can't put one or the other. Implicit intents keep stopping. So I have missed something. What did I break? Fatal exception. Oh, I think that I have... I must specify in the layout. Okay, I have to specify it not with the Android colon. So it needs to be layout and not Android layout is what it looks like it's saying. Okay, so there it didn't crash, and there it's fine. Yeah.
Wait a minute. What changed? Android part?
I had said Android colon layout, and it should have been just layout equal. So this part right here, that's the part that changed. So one of the things that lets you do is kind of break your layouts down into smaller chunks, for instance. If you have a very large screen, you can kind of compose it from smaller layouts. Or if you have things that are maybe repeated, you can sometimes use that there too. So,
Mr. Smith, whenever I select my the tablet or whatever that I need to use, like the Nexus S, it keeps switching it over to like the bigger, I forget what the tablet, the 7-inch tablet.
Yeah, it just picks the top one on the list. So as long as you keep this running, it will stay on the one that's running.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you just keep your emulator up, then it won't keep switching. But if I were to hit, say, stop on this, close it, you'll see it immediately switches over to the 10-inch tablet once it gets back in here. Or at least it should. It usually does. Maybe it didn't. But that's been my experience, is usually if I shut it down is usually when it changes. So does that make sense for kind of handling the portrait mode, is to just make it scroll? Is anybody? Yep.
You're still say buttons. I thought you changed the name of them.
I need to go back. I need to change the labels. Yeah.
No, that's what I meant earlier.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I need to go change in the labels. But the catch is, you see, I don't have 2 copies of it. So it's the thing that you were worried about it being 2 copies is
smooth.
It's not an issue. So. And so that way sometimes the variant thing is a good way to solve that. Sometimes it's easier to do something like that and just make it scrollable, and that way you're still using the same layout on every application. Now, one things you have to watch there, and I avoided it because of how I did it. If you do a different process, this might have ended up pointing to the wrong one. You might have ended up with this as content main up here. If you went through a different process, in which case you would see, let's say I run this with content main instead of activity main, it looks to be working the same way in portrait, but if I go to landscape, you'll see that there's no scrolling. You see that? So the application still works if you use content main, but you don't get the scrolling. So you do have to be a little bit careful, because oftentimes, especially if I were to rename this layout, it will go ahead and change it in the Java code for me already, assuming that that's what you wanted to do. But because I made a copy, I didn't do a rename in there. That's why I didn't have that problem. Cool.
So like the scroll view is like surrounding it in a div in HTML.
Yeah, you can kind of think about it that way. Yeah, the scroll view is almost like a div. Awesome. Okay, so that's fixed. I'm going to go back to fixing my labels and my text. So I'm going to go in here. Let's minimize that. And go to content main now, because you'll notice that the content main has all the controls. Activity main doesn't have anything in it, so you can't really edit it here. You need to be over on content main to edit it. So I've given them the labels there, the IDs, but I need to change the text. So let's start from the top one. Well, the top one, I definitely want to not have any text. Maybe I'll put in the text that's shown in the example. So I'll put that in. HTTP //developer.android.com. So that's my text there. The location edit will be Golden Gate Bridge, and the share button would be, what do they have there? Twas Brillig in the Slithy Toes.
But aren't those just hints? Those aren't the actual text that's going to be in there, right?
Those are actual text values. The reason I'm going ahead and doing that is just so we can just hit the button.
Oh.
So I am putting those in as actual text. And the buttons, I'm going to change that text there too. So here this would be open website. This will be open location. And this one will be share this text. Okay, cool. That's good. Now, is there anything else that we should do here in terms of like good practices before we call the layout done?
Extract.
Probably extract. Extract what?
The strings.
The strings. Okay. So we should probably extract the strings. Another thing I might want to consider doing when I drag these in, and I dragged in the plain text one, you'll see that there's a bunch of other ones here, right? These are actually from here down to there. These are actually all edit texts, okay? This is not, all of these are the same control, okay? But you can see they're labeled with different names, okay? So labeled like date and time and number and plain text. Why? What do you think that affects?
The input type?
The input type? Okay. So where can I find that? What's the name of that if I'm looking under attributes? What attribute effects does that affect? Oh, no, you said it. Text name. Input type. So that affects input type. So if I drop in plain text, and this is kind of weird, if you drop in plain text, notice what it actually says as the type. So you...
It says person name?
It's person name, which probably is not what I want. So I'm going to click in here. I'm going to uncheck that up at the top. Because really, what am I putting in here? I'm putting a URL. So it actually would make more sense for me to check the text URI box. Got it? The reason that's relevant is that changes the keyboard that you get when you're editing the field. So I'm going to change that to text URI. I'm going to change this one. Let's see what our options are. I might just leave it at text person name.
Wait, how do you? Okay, I can never get this to open up. Right?
You what?
How do you open it up? Oh,
I'm just clicking on the flag.
Oh, okay.
I'm just clicking on the flag because these are all flags. So text person name. It's like, well, it's not really a person name. So what's the closest thing that we could pick for the location name?
Text long message.
Okay, so text long message would be like if I'm sending maybe a text message to somebody.
Would that not be it? Or?
Not so much. I mean, it could be one that we could try.
Short message.
Or we could try short message. Short message is pretty close. One of the ones that I would notice here, notice how every word is capitalized.
Oh, so text cap sentences?
I would probably say text cap words. So if you pick cap words, it automatically does a shift when you get to a new word. Versus you were saying cap sentences would make it uppercase at the beginning of a sentence.
I didn't see the words. My bad.
Yeah. So this one I would do text cap words because I just want the first letter to be capitalized. So short message and cap words is probably pretty good there. And then on the other side for this one, I would probably go in here, uncheck text person name. I would still call this one short message, and I would say capitalized sentences instead here.
We put the other one as a short message too, right?
Yep, I put them both as short message. Oh, but I didn't hit apply on that, so it didn't actually save it.
Wait, why short message? What does that do?
So it just, I forget. There's a bunch of these, and I forget exactly how they work. But that's a reasonable one to put in there. It's basically it's something that's probably not going to be necessarily repeated. So I feel like it's also kind of a hint to the autocomplete to some extent, and it's generally a hint to the keyboard for how the keyboard should function. So I'm going to go ahead and so I've got that in there, and so let's extract the strings now. So the first one would be Alt Enter. Oh, and that one didn't save because I wanted to change that one to text URI. So I changed that to text URI. Here I want to extract that. Extract resource. And now what it suggests to me, and we kind of saw this already, what it suggests to me for the resource name is just based on the value. So it's suggesting HTTP developer android.com, but that's not really a good name. So what would I want to call this? Well, I might want to say this one is maybe default. I want to say that this one is default website. Right, so that's the default there. Or I could call it default URL. That might be a good name too. So I'm going to call that, let's call that default URL. So I'm going to say default URL here. And this one, I'm going to kind of do the same thing. I'm going to extract that and call it default location. And I might call this one default share. Okay, so those three are extracted. Let's go down to here, open website, and let's extract that. And that might be URL button or URL button text, either one. And this one be location button. So the main thing is that I'm naming these based on where they're used in the application, rather than naming them based on the text that's in there, which is the default is the text that's in there. Part of that is if you ever go to translate your app, what your translator will most likely want is they want to know what control, where does this appear in your UI, and so that is more helpful than having it just be the text, because there's a lot of different languages where context matters. So giving that context in the name of the string helps for translation purposes. Any questions?
Can you show the top?
Yep. You saw what you needed to see, Sheridan?
Can you scroll down one more? I'm just making
Okay.
sure I have all the right input types.
Yeah.
Got it all?
Okay. So now that we've got the kind of UI set up, we just want to go in and add in the on-click listeners. So I'm going to say on-click here. And so here I might try, what could I call this? I might say, well, I'll probably just say that. Just say what's there. So open website is the name of that function. Alt enter. So open website. We've got that. And then here we'd say open location. So on click open location. There we go. And here share button, I would say on click share. So you should have 3.
What did you name share? Oh, just share.
Just share. So open website, open location, and share. Maybe I could call it shared text because it's sharing that text, but that's fine. I'm just going to call it share. Okay, so kind of working our way from the top to the bottom. So remember our goal here is we want to build up some implicit intents for each of these 3 cases. So in the first case, opening a website, I want to create an implicit intent and then fire that intent. So what is step 1 in that process? What's the first line of code that I need to write into open website?
You have to instantiate an intent.
Okay, I have to instantiate an intent. And what arguments do I need to put in? What arguments do I need to give to the constructor of the intent?
An action string.
Okay, some action string. All right, where am I going to find that?
We have to create it.
Okay, it already exists.
It's on the intent class.
Okay, probably a good place to start. And what does it probably start with?
Action.
Action.
Okay, so that's a really good guess. We can say action underscore. It probably is going to start with that. And then you can kind of start looking through and figure out which one it is. So in this case, the one I'm looking for is action view. Okay, because that's going to open up a website. The next thing I want to do is to be able to provide it a URL. So in here, I'm going to say intent dot set data, and we're going to say URI dot parse, and to that I need to provide the text in the edit text. Now I may need to rewind. I may need to step back a second because I don't have any references to my edit texts yet, right? So I need to fix that. So I'm going to, before I can kind of finish those methods, I need to go up top. I need to add a reference to all of those fields. So edit text, and this is going to be the URL edit private edit text, my location edit private edit text, and my share edit. So those are my 3 fields there. going down and on create, we're going to then go retrieve those. So I'm going to say find view by ID, r.id dot URL edit. We're going to have location edit is going to be find view by ID r.id dot location edit. Last one would be share edit. So this is going to be find view by ID r.id dot share edit. So I've got those three controls, those three edit boxes bold in.
And I'm guessing we're going to set the data URI that parse
Mm-hmm.
URL edit .toString.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're going to say URL edit dot get text, not toString, but get text toString. If you bypass if you just say toString, you end up taking you're taking the control and turning it into a string rather than taking the text in the control and turning it a string. And those don't actually give you the same result if you leave out the word get text. So I'm going to put that in there. And then once I'm done, I can say start activity. And we can pass it in the intent. Okay. So let's give that a try and just see if that first field works. So I'm going to click on open website, and if this is all good, I should be taken over to Chrome with the link to developer.android.com, which seems to be what it did, right? So it went to the right place. So I can go back, and you'll kind of notice when I send these implicit intents, it still keeps track of the backstack, even though I'm going between different applications. It still keeps track of where I came from. All right. Any questions on this so far? Can anybody spot the bugs here? Because there are at least 2 bugs in the code already.
Would it be changing the URI?
Okay. What do you mean changing the URI?
Like changing the text?
Okay. So, as in, I shouldn't be able to edit it?
No, as in like if you change that
Uh-huh.
link, it will take you to a new link, will it?
If I change it to a different link, it will what?
It won't take you to a different link, will it? Or I may be wrong.
Let's try it. I'm going to go to google.com.
Oh, it works. Never mind.
Okay, so that works. I can change it and use it because you can see every time I click the button, I'm pulling the current text that's in the field. What happens if I provide it a URL that's not valid? So, for instance, what happens if, let's try this one. So, let's say I go to localhost. Typically speaking, you don't have a server, a web server running on your phone. So, this is typically something that doesn't exist, which you can see there. Okay. So, if I give it a URL there that's in some sense not valid, right? It's a valid URL, but the browser can't find it, right? It still works. It goes to the browser, and the browser gives us an error. Good so far? But watch this. What happens if I just say HTTP? Is that a valid URL anymore?
No.
It's not, okay? So something different happens this way. I'm going to hit open website. It went to a blank. See, it went to about blank. Try something different. We try clearing it completely out, so we have a blank field. Oh no, my application crashed. All right. So somebody try that, put in it blank, and then see if you can figure out why it crashed.
You don't have a what's it called? An exception right there. You need to add a URI exception.
Okay. So if there's an exception, there should be a way to prove that there was an exception, right?
Yeah.
We don't want to make a fix until we know that that's the cause, right? Because otherwise we're fixing a bug that isn't a bug, right? So find out what's actually causing it. Put a screenshot in Discord. If you find it, put a screenshot in Discord. So yes, Mo, you're on the right track, and yes, it's an exception. But how would you determine?
Why is it not launching anything for me? What's the likely culprit?
So, like, you tell it to run the program and nothing happens?
No, it just won't open anything. Period. Like even if it's wrong or won't crash, I mean, it just nothing happens when I hit the button.
My guess is that you don't have the on-click property in your layout.
Yeah.
Paul, are you using the emulator or the physical tablet?
Emulator.
It could just be that your computer is acting extremely slow and the emulator is just being real slow. I mean, if you plug in your tablet, you could probably try it there and see if it throws anything.
Yeah. Okay.
But
all right.
I would check your layout first and check that the on-click attributes are actually there. That's my suspicion.
My thing stopped working.
Okay. Okay. So here's a hint. Where do you go to find out about exceptions? If there's an exception, where do you go to find out more information about it?
The website.
The website?
Yeah, or you Google it. I don't know.
Okay. Sometimes Google will help you, but Google will only help you when you know what the problem is. You don't have enough information to Google it.
Wouldn't it be in Logcat?
Probably would be in Logcat. Yeah. And so that's part of what I'm trying to get to with kind of testing your applications. At this point you can't Google yourself out of that. So yes, in Logcat is where I want to go looking. And I want to make sure I'm on the right device. Yes. There you go. Let's see if I can pop that out.
It's an on-click listener.
Mm-hmm.
It's an illegal state exception.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And why? Oh, because I didn't do it yet. That's why. So I'm going to pull up the stack trace that you have. So you found it. Yep. Logcat would be the place to look. And so if we're kind of looking at this, right, it's a very tall exception, isn't it? Right? There's a lot there. So obviously in all that code, right, is the information we need. Now, it's important to kind of be able to look at the trace and determine what of that information is actually helpful to you. Okay? So if I'm looking at this, what information might point me to a solution?
There's a line that says no activity found to handle intent.
Okay. Where is that? It's here, okay? Activity not found exception. Okay. Now, you have a different exception than the exception that I got, right? And because I can look over here, what does it say? Android intent action view, right? Android intent action view. But what is this? You see the data?
Yeah.
Okay. So why is there a youtube.com here? Anybody besides Troy, give me a suggestion why does it say youtube.com there? Where did that come from? So, if your tester gave you the screenshot, no other information, what can you determine from this?
That was the link that was put in there.
Okay. So they put in youtube.com. Okay. And so in response to that, we got no activity found. Okay. Why did we get no activity found? Let's do a little testing. So let me try to put in, instead of putting in youtube.com, let me put in http youtube.com. That did not crash for me, right? So notice that. So youtube.com did crash, but http youtube.com did not crash.
So it's basically saying you have to have the full address versus you can't just put in your own simplified version.
Okay. Which probably means on the side that's handling this, you remember how we kind of looked at the intent filter? It probably means they have an intent filter that says only give me it if the protocol is HTTP or HTTPS. Does that make sense? So it's expecting there to be a protocol there. Everybody with me?
Yes.
Okay. Now, that's one error. Okay, so we get one error for youtube.com. I'm going to get a different error if I leave it blank. It's not the same error. It's not a no activity found. It's not an activity not found. It's a different exception. So, what exception did I get this time? Okay. So I'm going to blow this up. Okay. All right. Well, I guess it is the same one. Oh, it's the same one. So, which is kind of odd. So I got an activity not found exception, but it says dat equals blank. Okay. So here, right, I guess given those, we have the same kind of thing coming out. Well, why do we have activity not found exception? What method, right? What method actually makes that exception fire? Okay. Again, we've got a big stack trace. So which method made the exception fire?
Well, I see the action there in that line that we're on is it looks, I don't know the word for that, but that's what the string is.
Okay.
It's the constant, what that represents. It's built into the system. So it would be the intent, yeah?
I'm looking for some more specifics there. Yes, this is interesting because it's in blue. And it's in blue because it's our code. It's in blue because this is our code and everything else here is the Android operating system itself. But what can we pull out of this code that will help, out of that line, that will help us solve the problem?
What does 29 look like? It's blocked on the screen there.
Okay. So you notice that there's a number 29. That's right. 29 is helpful. What does that 29 represent?
The line of the air.
Okay. The line number. Yay. Okay. So this is a good reason to have our line numbers on. Okay. So here's line 29. Given that, do we know now which exception, which method threw the exception?
The start activity.
Okay, start activity. And so we got activity not found exception. So it's throwing that because it can't find an activity to use for that intent. Okay, so what do I need to do here? Well, I need to put in that if statement that we saw on the slides. Do you remember that? Where I said we had to guard this check, guard the start activity. So I'm going to say if intent dot resolve activity, and we pass in get package manager. As long as that doesn't return null, then we're good and we're in the clear to call start activity. And otherwise, we probably want to tell the user that hey, something went wrong, but we don't want the application to crash. So here I might say toast.makeText. I'm going to pass in the context, which would be this. And maybe the string is maybe browser or browser not found. And maybe we only want this to appear for a short time. So toast length short. And then finally I want to call show on all of that. So if it can find an activity to do it, then I'll let it do it, and otherwise we'll fall back. So now it should still work if we okay. Now, one thing that's happening here, and I think this is a change. You notice how it's saying browser not found? And there's kind of a hint here. It says, hey, you didn't ask for a certain permission. I'm going to test this real quick on API 21 because I don't think that this used to work this way.
Mine worked.
Okay. So API 21 it worked, but it's not working on API 30. Now, when you said it worked, are you using an emulator?
I'm on the tablet.
Okay, so the tablet is a different version of Android. I think the tablet is API 29. I think the tablet is API 29, but my emulator here is API 30. So there's a hint here, and it says that you may need to do something with query permission needed, because I think what's happened is they've changed how that operates.
Wait, is it supposed to work on API 30?
It looks like it's broken on API 30.
Oh, mine ran, so maybe I did something wrong.
I don't know. Maybe I did something wrong. But for me, it didn't run. So if I go look for resolve activity, package manager.
Yeah, I don't know. For once, things are working for me. I can't get it to not work.
Oh, I need to go up to API 30 here on the docs.
It's changing the HTTP or HTTPS, all that. That's what breaks it, right?
I actually removed everything.
So it says www, something like that?
No, nothing. Just empty string. I put in empty string, nothing in the field, and hit open website.
Back to the code real quick. I just need to...
So I want to go here. So resolve activity, and I'm looking at this, and anyway, what were you asking, Mo?
Oh, okay, I see. Something my package manager or something was like, it was like glitching out and it gave me an error. I just wrote it wrong.
So what does this say? Query permission needed.
I lied. Mine doesn't work.
Yeah, mine neither.
Okay. All right. So in Android 11, which is API 30, things have changed. So the answer is that some of the stuff that used to use is no longer available. So I think we have to change. I think we have to change to a different permission. So manifest with in our case, your app might need query interact well. Okay, query all packages. That's what I want. Well, where did that go? That's not what I want. I want to be able to see what permission do I need to add. Well, maybe I'll just try. Maybe I'll just try adding it. So I kind of mentioned this that you know sometimes we need additional permissions to do things in Android. So this is a case. So uses permission, and it would be Android permission query all packages is the one they want. There. I just want to terminate that. All right, so I'm going to try that with the permission enabled. Oh, no, I want to be back in the API 30 tablet. Okay, problem solved. Okay, so here's the tidbit that had to be added to the manifest to make it work in API 30. Is I had to request the permission to query all packages.
Yeah, mine's still in red.
Which part?
The Android name, Android.permission.
I did an alt enter on it, and it suggested me adding this. Tools ignore.
Why would you ignore it if you need the package?
So tools ignore says ignore the error. Is don't tell me that this is a problem. Because what they're saying is that you really shouldn't do this. You shouldn't ask for query all packages. But that's just the quick workaround for this one, because I don't really want to dive into all of the new stuff that they want to make you do.
Okay.
Can you say again what that was? You said you ignored it or suppressed it, or
yeah. So this suppresses the error that it was saying. So it was saying here. It's kind of giving you details and say, like, yes, this is available, query all packages, but basically you really shouldn't use this permission. So when I hit Alt Enter here, I said suppress.
Okay, and it automatically put the tools.
Yeah, so it automatically put that in there and said query all package permission. So I'm just saying it's okay. I understand. I'm not going to fix it right now. Basically,
it's interesting. If you just type it out, it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. Well, it needed to add this up here, the XML namespace tools.
Okay, so if we try it again,
yeah,
then it should.
Then it should work. So then you should be able to actually just type in wherever you want, and it should work. And that way, if I leave this blank, it should say browser not found.
And we only have to do that if we're on the tablet or that one tablet or whatever.
If you're on API 30.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's Android 11. Your tablets are Android 10. So on the tablets that are on the tablets there, you don't have to add in that line.
So in this field here, if we just put something like
Mm-hmm.
Craigslist.com or whatever.com,
Yep.
It won't work. It's not working on mine.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you need at least, what's the minimum you would need? www?
It's I don't think that even the www will fix it, because the problem is it needs a protocol.
Oh,
it needs
right,
to know
okay.
what protocol it is. Now I'm gonna take a stab in the dark and guess, and I haven't tested this, but I'm gonna guess if I parse it as a URL and not as a URI, then I'm gonna get a different behavior. And I think that's all uppercase URL. No, it didn't find it. URL. I want java.net.
Import something for it to work.
Huh?
I imported something for it to work.
Mm.
URL parse.
Yeah, it got here. Java.net.url, and I think maybe it's new URL. Yeah, it's that. So new URL, and I pass that in. So I'm going to say URL is equal to new. So I guess it's good that we did this together today, because otherwise I would not have known that things in API 30 changed.
Do you want us to change it to URL, not URI?
I'm playing with it.
Okay,
I'm going to see if it works. Just hang on to it, and so if this works, then you can do it as well. I'm not entirely sure that my experiment here is going to work. Okay, so that still needs to be a URI. So if I take that, can I convert my URL to a URI? Yes, I can. So I can take my URL, convert it to a URI. Both of those can potentially throw an exception. So here I do need to catch that. Surround with try catch. Oh, nope. That's not what I want. So it can throw a URI syntax exception, which a URI syntax exception is just an exception. And this can throw a malformed URI exception. So that's interesting. So I'm going to wrap this logic here. Try. Catch. And the other one was a malformed URL exception. So catch. And so toast, make text. Invalid URL. And this one would also be invalid URL. Now, what is it complaining?
That's ballooned up nicely.
Yeah. This is why I'm like, hold up.
Yeah, you're in the rabbit hole.
I am very much in the rabbit hole. So this says provided. Oh, it requires a URI, not a URI. Oh boy. Okay. So it wants a URI, which is a Android.net URI. It needs an Android.net URI, but I think I'm giving it a Java.net URI. Oh, that is so weird. That explains why things are behaving differently. So there's a Java.net URI and there's a Java.net URI and an Android.net URI, which apparently are not the same things. Okay. So I need to be sneaky. So string URL. I'm going to turn it into a string, and then I'm going to turn it into a URL. I'm going to turn it back to a string, and then we're going to parse that URI. URI.parse.
ToString is in there twice?
No, ToString is... Oh, yes, it is.
It doesn't hurt, I guess, huh?
No, they're two different ToStrings. So this ToString is on the text that's in the field. This ToString is on the URL object.
That looks like it was a lot of work just for a small little workaround.
Yeah. I'm going to see if this works. Nope. Never mind. Never mind.
It really doesn't like you.
It really doesn't like me. So at the end of the day, because it's still when I do that, then it says malformed URL exception, and so it doesn't work there anyway. Okay, so I'm gonna unwind all that stuff that I did because it isn't gonna work. I might leave it like that. Oh. URI.parse. So unwind all that. Get back to where it was. So yeah. No, it doesn't like me. I do wonder, if I look at the URI, I wonder if I could check what the protocol is. So if I looked at this, data dot get. Oh, I can get the scheme. So
what does scheme mean? What is that?
That's the part at the beginning. That's the HTTP part. So if I did a log dot d URL, let's see what that scheme is there. Because maybe there's an easy way to solve this problem. So if I type it in as developer.android.com, wait, why did that work? Or did it just crash?
Wow.
Man, welcome to my hell, man. This is how I
Yeah.
live.
Oh,
every day.
it crashed. It crashed. So it crashed. Why? Because print line needs a message. Okay. So it crashed because the log.d made it crash. Because the scheme is null. But that kind of tells me what I wanted to know. And so I can say if the data.scheme, if that's null, then data.setScheme, then I could change the scheme, maybe. Unless it's read-only. Is this another immutable object? It might be. It might be. Oh, because I need to use a URI builder. Anyway. That's in the weeds. So yes, I could probably do it if I used a URI builder. That's the catch. But that's more than we needed to look there. Anyway, so we've resolved the problem because it turns out whatever you type in there, you're either going to get that it can't find an activity to resolve it to, or it's going to work. In the end, is what the case is. And so I can rewind this all the way back to here, which is where we were. Okay. So let's jump down to location maybe, and think about how to deal with the location. So location should start out at least the same way. It's worth wondering, maybe what should the location be? So if I've got my intent here, what action should I use to look at the location?
Like what you would put after the dot when you do the you type, it'd be intent in capital letters and then dot. Probably just look at the choices, right? Because it's an action.
Yeah.
You'd probably guess by the name.
Well, actually, it's really hard to guess by the name because they've got some weird names. So if you look into the code lab, and you can kind of maybe get a hint here. So if we look down here, we're on task 3, step 5. Down here on step 5, you kind of read through. It'll kind of tell you a little bit about how to create the action. Well, as it turns out, the action here that we want is action view. And honestly, that's usually something I end up having to Google, is say, I want the action to do X, Y, Z, and sometimes that's quicker than looking at the docs because the list is very long. But the answer is we want action view. And so then we also want to set the data kind of like we did above. So intent dot set data. And I might want to pass into that URI dot parse. And this would be the location edit dot get text dot toString. So it's kind of like the other one. I'm just pulling it from the other field. And then the rest of this would be here. So that wouldn't change. So this would be there. Maybe it's a map app not found. Now the catch is you notice how in here we don't have a protocol. We don't have that scheme, right? We don't have the HTTP, right? So we need to tack that in our code. And so if you look at the example, what they tell you to do in there is to add in this part, right? And you may remember seeing that on the slides that they started the example with geo 00 question Q is all that. So kind of subbing in that part at the beginning then turns it into a location address. And so because I've never used the map app here it's asking me to sign in and such, but it should eventually pull it up. There we go, Golden Gate Bridge. And so you can kind of hold, sometimes you need to do gestures, so I can hold the control key down and kind of move it around and do a pinch gesture to zoom out and rotate and such.
Mr. Smith, for some reason my set data on open location is underscoring is red.
Okay. You may need to take a close look on it. So look at it. I'm saying set data. And is it intent.setData?
I have found my issue. I have a capitalized I on intent.
Okay. That would be why, because you're referring to the intent class, not the intent object.
Yeah.
So we've got the class name here and then the name of our variable here. So effectively, you've got a class and an object.
Yeah, we're all good now.
Okay. Yep. So that one's pretty simple. That's basically the only thing you have to do that's different there is to add in that it's a geo coordinate instead of it being a URL. So then the last thing to do would be the share, and I'm gonna actually lean on the example more here. Because this one takes a little bit more code to write out. So the way that you do a share is first you're going to start with this share compat. Now, it's kind of interesting to notice that word compat. That compat is short for compatibility. So that the reason that's there is because different versions of Android have implemented the share functionality in different ways. So what we're actually using here is a support library that's nowadays it's actually part of Jetpack that allows us to share regardless of what version of Android we're running on. Does that make sense? So this was a backwards compatibility class. And so that's why we're using that as kind of a layer on top. So if I drop that in, we're starting with share compat. We're going to do an intent builder, and so this kind of is going to build it up for us. First few things I need to go in here. I need to say, well, it's coming from the context that we're in, right? So this, the type of the thing we're trying to share is going to be text plain, because we're just typing it into a field. And I need to pull out the text that is in that box. So I might just put that into a string txt is equal to share edit dot get text dot toString. So we're saying, the context, we're saying what MIME type is it. In this case, we're sharing just a little bit of text. We're saying what the title for the chooser is, putting the text in, and then finally saying, let's start the chooser. So let's say I run that with that code in there.
Hey, Mr. Smith, how did you get that? I know you copied and pasted it from a web page, but there's a faster way to get all that share compat stuff.
The geo?
Whatever you got on line 55.
Line 55.
Yeah, you pasted that in, and I didn't see how you got that.
Oh, I just got it from the code lab. It's on step 6.
Oh, right. Okay.
This is just from the code lab. It's right here on step 6, step 3. I just jumped straight there because we'd done most of the stuff already for that to set it up. So then when I hit share, I kind of see this is the share dialog that comes up. So it'll give me it'll show me the text that's there and give me an option to which apps I want to send it to. So for instance, if I wanted to drop it in Gmail, I'd just click Gmail there. And let's skip through this. Take me to Gmail. Okay. Well, no, I can't go to Gmail because I would need a email address there. Let me try messages then instead. New message. 555-123-4. There it goes. So that's kind of how that operates. So if you do want to implement a share button, which is kind of a common requirement, that's basically your starting point. Is you use share compat and intent builder, and you just kind of build it up until you get all the properties in there that you will need. Any questions on that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, 55 there. Is that pretty standard, that order that was there? I know you can share different MIME types, but generally it's from set type, set chooser title, set text, start chooser.
Yeah, you'll basically have those. You may have some additional things, but depending on what you're sharing. And I believe that these methods between from and start chooser, I think these three can be called in any order. I think from and start chooser you have to call, like from has to be at the beginning, start chooser needs to be at the end, but the rest of those methods can be in any order in between.
Okay, awesome.
So they're just using chaining to build this up. So that's it. I mean, that is the code lab. So you can read a little bit more about the share compat. Share compat is one of those things that's not on the slides, but is in the chapter. So as you're reading in the chapter, a lot of the same stuff we've talked about, but going down to say, and we wanted to receive an intent. I think that was also on here. Let me check that. So we may have one last step on the code lab.
I don't know if I just zoned out, but did we ever actually get the website link working?
We got it working as long as you typed in the protocol.
Okay, that's what I thought, because I was like,
Yeah.
I knew that you were trying to figure it out, but I never heard you be like, yeah, okay, we got it, and I was
No.
like, yeah, I
No.
didn't know if we ever got it
I
working.
kind of got to the point where, like, okay, if I was going to fix it, and then it would be URI Builder to do it, but at that point, it's like, okay, we've already wasted too much time on this. I need to move on. So,
wouldn't the wisest thing to do be just to have the logic put that protocol in the front?
yes, that's
I guess
what
if someone pastes in a URL with the protocol already, that might break it. But...
That's what I was trying to get it to do. That's what my examination was trying to do.
Okay.
Is to try and get it to put in the protocol for you. But the tools I tried to use didn't work out. So, as well as I hope. I'm like, maybe this will work. No, not so much. So down on page 141, here you can find there's a whole section on the intent builder. You can read kind of the paragraph about it. And then there's also, starting on page 142, going on 142 to the end. That's all stuff that you probably want to read up on a little bit. You don't need to be an expert on it. It's not on the slides, and some of it is a little bit more advanced. So that stuff is in the reading material, but is not on the slides as far as tasks and such goes. Okay. I think the one thing we hadn't done, and I forgot about this because I was like, no, we're done. But no, there's one last thing that we want to do, and that is just to implement a way to receive an intent. So in here, what we're doing, I believe, is they're adding another activity, and that activity is going to receive that specific intent case. So, and they actually create this as a separate application. I'll skip that. If you want to go through that, you can. So what they do in task 5 is they create another app that they use as an intent receiver. They call it implicit intents receiver. To do that, you can also potentially build it into. It doesn't have to be a separate app. You could build this into the same app that we started, but I think I'm gonna leave that as an exercise for you to do if you would so choose.
So I mean, it's not. Oh, sorry. Yeah, is it not worth a grade then?
It's not mandatory. You don't need to do this part for a grade. Just if you go through the up to this point, you've got all 3 of those buttons working, then that's good enough. So the last bit to do for labs today, obviously you want to check in the code that we just did. The coding challenge here is going to be your exercise for today. So I'm going to go check.
Should we update our Android Studio? It says there's an update available.
As I mentioned previously, do not update Android Studio.
Oh, okay,
we're going to be on 4.1.1 until the end of the semester. So, for the rest of the semester.
In your screen there, you have your tabs open, content name, and activity.
Yep.
Okay, the red means there's some error somewhere?
No, the red does not mean there's an error.
What does it mean, red and green? Because mine are either red or green. It looks like yours are black.
I actually have all. I have some black, I have some red, and I have some green. Anybody want to postulate why that is? No, it's not because there's errors.
It's for GitHub.
Yes, it is about the GitHub status. It is about the GitHub status. So if I actually go into my commit screen, then we'll kind of see some of it. So in here, and I can kind of troubleshoot it from here, looking at that. So for instance, this one that's green, that one that's green means it's been queued up to be added to GitHub. The ones that are red, you can see I'll find them down here under unversioned files, I believe, is what that means. Excuse me.
And it means they haven't been added to the repo, like they're not considered. But you're working on them in the current file.
Yeah, that's what it has to do with. It's the state of them in that they haven't been marked for being added to GitHub.
Is there? I may have asked this already, but those unversioned files, is there a way just to check those in every single time?
Unfortunately, you just have to go check that box. It's actually a safety precaution because in the real world, when you start doing this professionally, those are files I typically have to go through one by one and check to make sure it's actually something I want to commit. So that's actually a normal thing with Git. Is normally you don't check on versions files, and all versions of GitHub clients don't check those by default. You see the same thing with Tortoise Git. So like these are not checked. If I were to go to Tortoise Git in the folder here, right click and commit, you would see here there's unversioned files as well. Do you see that?
Yes.
So it's the same story. It's the same story. Those are not added automatically because that's not the kind of the expected workflow for Git. The expected workflow for Git is that you kind of queue them up before you commit, if that makes sense. So a lot of people like to use the command line when they're working with Git. And so when you're working with the command line, one of the things you have to do before you can run git commit is you have to run git add and add all of the files here, right? So normally I would do a git, if I was doing this over the command line, I would need to git add and add all this stuff, and then I would do a git commit. And so by checking the non-version files, we're basically doing the git add step, if that makes sense. But now that I've checked it all in, pushed it all up, you'll notice that it all went to black because now it's all checked in. So that color has to do with the state of it.
All right, are we good to head off and work on the challenge?
Yep, you are. You can go do the coding challenge, and that's it for today. We'll jump into lesson 3 next week.
And I just want to make sure, you said that the console labs aren't due till the 7th, right?
The 7th. Yep.
Okay.
The 7th.
Okay.
Yeah, they're not due till the 7th. So.
Okay, and then this is due on Sunday around midnight.
Yep, this is due Sunday.
Right. Okay.
But
all right, awesome.
You've got a few minutes between now and the end of class. I don't see any reason you shouldn't be able to finish the coding challenge in the next 30 minutes. So,
I mean, yeah, like the whole location thing that we've already gone through in the code labs is basically.
It's basically the same thing.
Yeah.
So, if you understood what we did in, step 5 here, then you can basically just replicate it on that project.
Okay. Don't forget the reading and the homework, guys.
Yep. Don't forget the reading and the homework. Oh, that's worth noting. For anybody,
for the 4 of us.
Is there like a change or something to the homework, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's due on. Everything's on Sunday.
I thought it was due tonight at like.
What
I have to check.
So on Inside Ranken, I put it as Sunday, so you can do it up until Sunday. I would say do it today because most people don't remember to do it on the weekend.
Okay. Yeah, I also have Gen Ed stuff I have to do this weekend, so.
Yeah. So I would just say do it today if you can.
Okay.
Because, yeah, there's the homework quiz.
It's 83 questions, right?
Oh my gosh.
No. It's like it's like 12.
I was like, oh no.
I was just trying to get Corey upset there.
Well, you got me.
Yeah, I know how to push your buttons, man. That's what you do.
Yeah.
All right, well, have a good weekend, everybody.
Yeah, cool. Yep. All right, all set then. Yeah. All right, have a good weekend, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye now.
No problem. See ya.